The Story of Civilization, Volume 2, The Life of Greece, Part 2, by Will Durant. Continued, Cassette 2, Side 1. Philosophy, therefore, was for Socrates neither theology nor metaphysics nor physics, but ethics and politics, with logic as an introduction and a means. Coming at the close of the sophistic period, he perceived that the sophists had created one of the most critical situations in the history of any culture, the weakening of the supernatural basis of morals. Instead of a frightened return to orthodoxy, he moved forward to the profoundest question that ethics can ask. Is a natural ethic possible? Can morality survive without supernatural belief? Can philosophy, by molding an effective secular moral code, save the civilization which its freedom of thought has threatened to destroy? When, in the Euthyphro, Socrates argues that the good is not good because the gods approve of it, but that the gods approve of it because it is good, he is proposing a philosophical revolution. His conception of good, so far from being theological, is earthly to the point of being utilitarian. Goodness, he thinks, is not general and abstract, but specific and practical, good for something. Goodness and beauty are forms of usefulness and human advantage. Even a dung basket is beautiful if it is well formed for its purpose. Since, Socrates thought, there is nothing else so useful as knowledge, knowledge is the highest virtue, and all vice is ignorance, though virtue here means excellence rather than sinlessness. Without proper knowledge, right action is impossible. With proper knowledge, right action is inevitable. Men never do that which they know to be wrong, that is unwise, injurious to themselves. The highest good is happiness. The highest means to it is knowledge or intelligence. If knowledge is the highest excellence, Socrates argues, aristocracy is the best form of government, and democracy is nonsense. It is absurd, says Xenophon's Socrates, to choose magistrates by lot where no one would dream of drawing lots for a pilot, a mason, a flute player, or any craftsman at all, though the shortcomings of such men are far less harmful than those that disorder our government. He condemns the litigiousness of the Athenians, their noisy envy of one another, the bitterness of their political factions and disputes. On these accounts, he says, I am constantly in the greatest fear lest some evil should happen to the state too great for it to bear. Nothing could save Athens, he thought, except government by knowledge and ability, and this was no more to be determined by voting than the qualifications of a pilot, a musician, a physician, or a carpenter. Nor should power or wealth choose the officials of the state. Tyranny and plutocracy are as bad as democracy. The reasonable compromise is an aristocracy in which office would be restricted to those mentally fit and trained for it. Despite these criticisms of Athenian democracy, Socrates recognized its advantages and appreciated the liberties and opportunities that it gave him. He smiled at the tendency of some followers to preach a return to nature, and adopted towards Antisthenes and the Cynics the same attitude that Voltaire would take towards Rousseau, that with all its faults, civilization is a precious thing, not to be abandoned for any primeval simplicity. Nevertheless, the majority of the Athenians looked upon him with irritated suspicion. The orthodox in religion considered him to be the most dangerous of the sophists. For while he observed the amenities of the ancient faith, he rejected tradition, wished to subject every rule to the scrutiny of reason, founded morality on the individual conscience rather than in social good or the unchanging decrees of heaven, and ended with a skepticism that left reason itself in a mental confusion unsettling to every custom and belief. To him, as well as to Protagoras and Euripides, praisers of the past, like Aristophanes, attributed the irreligion of the age, the disrespect of the young for the old, the loosened morals of the educated classes, and the disorderly individualism that was consuming Athenian life. Though Socrates refused to support the oligarchic faction, many of its leaders were his pupils or his friends. When one of them, Critias, led the oligarchs in a rich man's revolution and a ruthless terror, Democrats like Anytus and Meletus branded Socrates as the intellectual source of the oligarchic reaction and determined to remove him from Athenian life. They succeeded, but they could not destroy his immense influence. The dialectic he had received from Zeno was passed down through Plato to Aristotle, who turned it into a system of logic so complete that it remained unaltered for 1900 years. Upon science, his influence was injurious. Students were turned away from physical research, and the doctrine of external design offered no encouragement to scientific analysis. The individualist and intellectualist ethic of Socrates had a modest share, perhaps, in undermining Athenian morals, but its emphasis on conscience as above the law became one of the cardinal tenets of Christianity. Through his pupils, the many suggestions of his thought became the substance of all the major philosophies of the next 2 centuries. The most powerful element in his influence was the example of his life and character. He became for Greek history a martyr and a saint, and every generation that sought an exemplar of simple living and brave thinking turned back to nourish its ideals with his memory. "In contemplating the man's wisdom and nobility of character," said Xenophon, "I find it beyond my power to forget him, or in remembering him to refrain from praising him. And if among those who make virtue their aim, anyone has ever been brought into contact with a person more helpful than Socrates, I count that man worthy to be called most blessed." Chapter 17. The Literature of the Golden Age. 1. Pindar. Normally the philosophy of one age is the literature of the next. The ideas and issues that in one generation are fought out on the field of research and speculation provide in the succeeding generation the background of drama, fiction, and poetry. But in Greece, the literature did not lag behind the philosophy. The poets were themselves philosophers, did their own thinking, and were in the intellectual vanguard of their time. That same conflict between conservatism and radicalism which agitated Greek religion, science, and philosophy found expression also in poetry and drama, even in the writing of history. Since excellence of artistic form was added in Greek letters to depth of speculative thought, the literature of the Golden Age reached heights never touched again until the days of Shakespeare and Montaigne. Because of this burden of thought and the decay of royal or aristocratic patronage, the 5th century is less rich than the 6th in lyric poetry as an independent art. Pindar is the transition between the two periods. He inherits the lyric form, but fills it with dramatic magnificence. After him, poetry breaks through its traditional limits and, in the Dionysian drama, combines with religion, music, and the dance to make a greater vehicle for the splendor and passion of the Golden Age. Pindar came of a Theban family that traced its lineage back to primitive times and claimed to include many of the ancient heroes commemorated in his verse. His uncle, an accomplished flutist, passed down to Pindar much of his love for music and something of his skill. For advanced musical instruction, the parents sent the boy to Athens, where Lasus and Agathocles taught him choral composition. Before he was 20, that is, by 502, he returned to Thebes and studied with the poetess Corinna. 5 times he competed against Corinna in public song, and 5 times was beaten. But Corinna was very pleasing to behold, and the judges were men. Pindar called her a sow, Simonides a crow, himself an eagle. Despite this myopia, his reputation rose so high that his fellow Thebans soon concocted a story that told how once, as the young poet slept in the fields, some bees had settled upon his lips and had left their honey there. Soon he was handsomely commissioned to write odes in honor of princes and rich men. He was the guest of noble families in Rhodes, Tenedos, Corinth, and Athens, and for a time lived as royal bard at the courts of Alexander I of Macedon, Theron of Acragas, and Hiron I of Syracuse. Usually his songs were paid for in advance, very much as if a city should in our days engage a composer to celebrate it with an original composition for chorus and dance, and to conduct the performance himself. When Pindar returned to Thebes towards his 44th year, he was acclaimed as Boeotia's greatest gift to Greece. He worked painstakingly, composing the music for each poem and often training a chorus to sing it. He wrote hymns and paeans for deities, dithyrambs for the festivals of Dionysus, Parthenia for maidens, encomia for celebrities, scholia for banquets, threnoi or dirges for funerals, and eponychia or songs of victory for winners at the Pan-Hellenic competitions. Of all these, only 45 odes remain, named after the games whose heroes they honored. Of these odes, again, only the words survive, none of the music. In judging them, we are in the position of some future historian who, having the librettos of Wagner's operas but nothing of the scores, should list him as a poet rather than a composer, or should rank him by the words that once attended upon his harmonies. Or if we picture some Chinese scholar, unfamiliar with Christian story, reading in one evening in lame translation 10 Bach chorales divorced from their music and ritual, we shall measure our justice to Pindar. When we read today ode after ode in the silence of the study, he is beyond comparison the dreariest outpost in the classical landscape. Only the analogy of music can explain the structure of these poems. To Pindar, as to Simonides and Bacchylides, the form to be followed in an Eponysian ode was as compulsory as sonata form in the sonatas and symphonies of modern Europe. First came the statement of the theme, the name and story of the athlete who had gained the prize, or of the nobleman whose horses had drawn their chariot to victory. In general, Pindar celebrates the wisdom of man and his beauty and the splendor of his fame. In truth, he was not much interested in his formal subject. He sang in praise of runners, courtesans, and kings, and was willing to accept any promptly paying tyrant as a patron saint if the occasion gave scope to his rich imagination and his proudly intricate verse. His topic might be anything from a mule race to the glory of Greek civilization in all its variety and spread. He was loyal to Thebes, and not more inspired than the Delphic oracle when he defended Theban neutrality in the Persian War. But later he was ashamed of his error, and went out of his way to praise the leader of the Greek defense as renowned Athens, rich, violet-crowned, worthy of song, bulwark of Hellas, God-protected city. The Athenians are said to have given him 10,000 drachmas for the dithyrambs, or processional song, in which these lines occurred. Thebes, we are less reliably informed, fined him for his implied reproof, and Athens paid the fine. The second part of a Pindaric ode was a selection from Greek mythology. Here Pindar was discouragingly lavish. As Corinna complained, he sowed with the whole sack rather than with the hand. He had a high conception of the gods and honored them as among his best clients. He was the favorite poet of the Delphic priesthood. During his life he received many privileges from them, and after his death his spirit was, with Caledonian generosity, invited to share in the first fruits offered at Apollo's shrine. He was the last defender of the Orthodox faith. Even the pious Aeschylus seems wildly heretical beside him. Pindar would have been horrified by the blasphemies of Prometheus Bound. Sometimes he rises to an almost monotheistic conception of Zeus as the all, governing all things and seeing all things. He is a friend of the mysteries and shares the Orphic hope of paradise. He preaches the divine origin and destiny of the individual soul and offers one of the earliest descriptions of a last judgment, a heaven and a hell. Immediately after death, the lawless spirits suffer punishment, and the sins committed in this realm of Zeus are judged by one who passeth sentence stern and inevitable. But in sunshine ever fair abide the good, and all their nights and days in equal splendor wear. And never as of old with thankless toil for their poor empty needs they vex the soil and plough the watery seas, but dwelling with the glorious gods in ease, a tearless life they pass, whose joy on earth it was to keep their plighted word. But far from these, torments the rest sustain too dark for human gaze. The third and concluding section of a Pindaric ode was usually a word of moral counsel. We must not expect any subtle philosophy here. Pindar was no Athenian, and had probably never met or read a sophist. His intellect was consumed in his art, and no force remained for original thought. He was satisfied to urge his victorious athletes or princes to be modest in their success, and to show respect for the gods, their fellow men, and their own best selves. Now and then he mingled reproof with praise, and dared to warn Hiron against greed, but neither was he afraid to say a kind word for that most maligned and loved of all goods, money. He abhorred the revolutionists of Sicily, and warned them almost in the words of Confucius, "Even for the feeble it is an easy thing to shake a city to its foundation, but it is a sore struggle to set it in its place again." He liked the moderate democracy of Athens after Salamis, but sincerely believed aristocracy to be the least harmful of all forms of government. Ability, he thought, lies in the blood rather than in schooling, and tends to appear in families that have shown it before. Only good blood can prepare a man for those rare deeds that ennoble and justify human life. Things of a day, what are we and what not? A dream about a shadow is man. Yet when some God-given splendor falls, a glory of light comes over him, and his life is sweet. Pindar was not popular in his lifetime, and for some centuries yet he will continue to enjoy the lifeless immortality of those writers whom all men praise and no one reads. While the world was moving forward, he asked it to stand still, and it left him so far behind that though younger than Aeschylus, he seems older than Alcman. He wrote a poetry as compact, involved, and devious as Tacitus's prose, in an artificial and deliberately archaic dialect of his own, in meters so elaborate that few poets have ever cared to follow them. A notable exception is Dryden's Alexander's Feast, and so varied that only 2 of the 45 odes have the same metrical form. He is so obscure, despite the naivete of his thought, that grammarians spend a lifetime unraveling his Teutonic constructions, only to find beneath them a mine of sonorous platitudes. If, despite these faults and his frigid formality and turgid metaphors and tiresome mythology, some curious scholars are still persuaded to read him, it is because his narratives are swift and vivid, his simple morality is sincere, and the splendor of his language lifts to a passing grandeur even the humblest themes. He lived to the age of 80, secure in Thebes from the turmoil of Athenian thought. Dear to a man, he sang, is his own home city, his comrades and his kinsmen, so that he is well content. But to foolish men belongeth a love for things afar. 10 days before his end, in 442, we are told, he sent to ask the oracle of Ammon, "What is best for man?" To which the Egyptian oracle answered, like a Greek, "Death." Athens put up a statue to him at the public cost, and the Rhodians inscribed his 7th Olympian ode, a panegyric of their island, in letters of gold upon a temple wall. When in 335 Alexander ordered rebellious Thebes to be burned to the ground, he commanded his soldiers to leave unharmed the house in which Pindar had lived and died. 2. The Dionysian Theatre. The story is told in the lexicon of Suidas that during the performance of a play by Pratinus, about 500 BC, the wooden benches upon which the auditors sat gave way, injuring some and causing such alarm that the Athenians built on the southern slope of the Acropolis a theatre of stone, which they dedicated to the god Dionysus. This was not the theatre of Dionysus that tourists see today. The surviving structure was built under the direction of the finance minister Lycurgus about 338. Some parts of it are conjecturally traced back to 421. Some others appear to have been added in the 1st and 3rd centuries after Christ. In the next 2 centuries, similar theatres rose at Eretria, Epidaurus, Argos, Mantinea, Delphi, Tauromenium, Syracuse, and elsewhere in the scattered Greek world. But it was on the Dionysian stage that the major tragedies and comedies were first played, and fought out the bitterest phase of that war between the old theology and the new philosophy, which binds into one vast process of thought and change the mental history of the Periclean age. The great theatre is, of course, open to the sky. The 15,000 seats, rising in a fan-like semicircle of tiers toward the Parthenon, face Mount Hymettus and the sea. When the persons of the drama invoke the earth and the sky, the sun and the stars and the ocean, they are addressing realities which most of the audience, as it listens to the speech or chant, can directly see and feel. The seats, originally of wood, later of stone, have no backs. Many people bring cushions, but they sit through 5 plays in a day with no other known support for their spines than the unaccommodating knees of the auditors behind them. In the front rows are a few marble seats with backs for the local high priests of Dionysus and the officials of the city. At the foot of the auditorium is an orchestra, or dancing space, for the chorus. At the rear of this is a small wooden building known as the Skene, or scene, which serves to represent now a palace, now a temple, now a private dwelling, and probably also to house the players while off stage. There are such simple properties, altars, furniture, etc., as the story may require. In the case of Aristophanes' birds, there are important adjuncts of scenery and costume, and Agatharchus of Samos paints backgrounds in such a way as to produce the illusion of distance. Several mechanical devices help to vary the action or the place. To show an action that has transpired within the Skene, a wooden platform, a kyklema, may be wheeled out and have human figures arranged on it in a tableau suggestive of what has occurred. So a corpse may be on it, with the murderers holding bloody weapons in their hands. It is against the traditions of the Greek drama to represent violence directly on the stage. At either side of the proscenium is a large, triangular, upright prism that turns on a pivot. Each face of the prism has a different scene painted on it, and by revolving these periactoi, the background can be altered in a moment. A still stranger apparatus is the mechane, or machine, a crane with pulley and weights. It is placed upon the skene at the left and is used to lower gods or heroes from heaven down to the stage, or to raise them back to heaven, or even to exhibit them suspended in the air. Euripides in particular is fond of using this mechanism to let down a god, a deus ex machina, as the Romans put it, who piously unties the knot of his agnostic plays. The tragic drama at Athens is not a secular or perennial affair, but part of the annual celebration of the Feast of Dionysus. From among many plays offered to the Archon, a few are selected for performance. Each of the 10 tribes, or demes, of Attica chooses one of its rich citizens to serve as choragus, that is, director of the chorus. It is his privilege to pay the cost of training the singers, dancers, and actors, and to meet the other expenses of presenting one of the positions. Sometimes a choragus spends a fortune upon scenery, costumes, and talent. In this way, every play financed by Nicias obtains a prize. Some other choragi economize by hiring second-hand robes from dealers in theatrical costumes. The actual training of the chorus is usually undertaken by the dramatist himself. The chorus is in many ways the most important as well as the most costly part of the spectacle. Often it gives its name to the drama, and through it, for the most part, the poet expresses his views on religion and philosophy. The history of the Greek theater is a losing struggle of the chorus to dominate the play. At first the chorus is everything. In Thespis and Aeschylus, its role diminishes as the number of actors increase. In the drama of the 3rd century, it disappears. Usually the chorus is composed not of professional singers, but of amateurs chosen from the civic roster of the tribe. They are all men and number from Aeschylus 15. They dance as well as sing and move in dignified procession across the long and narrow stage, interpreting through the poetry of motion the words and moods of the play. Music holds in the Greek drama a place second only to the action and the poetry. Usually the dramatist composes the music as well as the words. Most of the dialogue is spoken or declaimed. Some of it is chanted in recitative, but the leading roles contain lyrical passages that must be sung as solos, duets, trios, or in unison or alternation with the chorus. The singing is simple, without parts or harmony. The accompaniment is usually given by a single flute, and accords with the voices note for note. In this way the words can be followed by the audience, and the poem is not drowned out in the song. These plays cannot be judged by reading them silently. To the Greeks, the words are but a part of a complex art form that weaves poetry, music, acting, and the dance into a profound and moving unity. Nevertheless, the play is the thing, and the prize is awarded less for the music than for the drama, and less for the drama than for the acting. A good actor can make a success of a middling play. The actor, who is always a male, is not disdained as in Rome, but is much honored. He is exempt from military service, and is allowed safe passage through the lines in time of war. He is called Hippocrates, but this word means answerer, that is, to the chorus. Only later will the actor's role as an impersonator lead to the use of the word as meaning hypocrite. Actors are organized in a strong union or guild called the Dionysian Artists, which has members throughout Greece. Troops of players wander from city to city, composing their own plays and music, making their own costumes, and setting up their own stages. As in all times, the incomes of leading actors are very high, that of secondary actors precariously low, and the morals of both are what might be expected of men moving from place to place, fluctuating between luxury and poverty, and too high-strung to be capable of a stable and normal life. In both tragedy and comedy, the actor wears a mask, fitted with a resonant mouthpiece of brass. The acoustics of the Greek theater and the visibility of the stage from every seat are remarkable, but even so it is found advisable to reinforce the voice of the actor and help the eye of the distant spectator to distinguish readily the various characters portrayed. All subtle play of vocal or facial expression is sacrificed to these needs. When real individuals are represented on the stage, like the Euripides of the Ecclesiastes and the Socrates of the Clouds, the masks imitate and largely caricature their actual features. The masks have come down into the drama from religious performances, in which they were often instruments of terror or humor. In comedy, they continue this tradition and are as grotesque and extravagant as Greek fancy can make them. Just as the actor's voice is strengthened and his countenance enlarged by the mask, so his dimensions are extended with padding, and his height is enhanced by an onkos, or projection on his head, and by kothornoi, or thick-soled shoes, on his feet. All in all, as Lucian puts it, the ancient actor makes a hideous and appalling spectacle. The audience is as interesting as the play. Men and women of all ranks are admitted, and after 420, all citizens who need it receive from the state the 2 obols required for entrance. Women sit apart from men, and courtesans have a place to themselves. Custom keeps all but the looser ladies away from comedy. It is a lively audience, not less or more mannerly than such assemblages in other lands. It eats nuts and fruit and drinks wine as it listens. Aristotle proposes to measure the failure of a play by the amount of food eaten during the presentation. It quarrels about seats, claps and shouts for its favorites, hisses and groans when it is displeased. When moved to more vigorous protest, it kicks the benches beneath it. If it becomes angry, it may frighten an actor off the stage with olives, figs, or stones. Aeschylus is almost stoned to death for an offensive play. Aeschylus is nearly killed because the audience believes that he has revealed some secrets of the Eleusinian mysteries. A musician who has borrowed a supply of stones to build a house promises to repay it with those that he expects to collect from his next performance. Actors sometimes hire a claque to drown out with applause the hisses they fear, and comic actors may throw nuts to the crowd as a bribe to peace. If it wishes, the audience can by deliberate noise prevent a drama from continuing and compel the performance of the next play. In this way, a long program may be shortened within bearing. There are 3 days of drama at the city Dionysia. On each day, 5 plays are presented, 3 tragedies and a satyr play by one poet, and a comedy by another. The performance begins early in the morning and continues till dusk. Only in exceptional cases is a play performed twice in the theater of Dionysus. Those who have missed it there may see it in the theaters of other Greek cities, or with less splendor on some rural stage in Attica. Between 480 and 380, some 2,000 new dramas are performed at Athens. In early times, the prize for the best tragic trilogy was a goat, for the best comedy a basket of figs and a jug of wine. But in the Golden Age, the 3 prizes for tragedy and the single prize for comedy take the form of grants of money by the state. The 10 judges are chosen by lot in the theater itself on the first morning of the competition, out of a large list of candidates nominated by the council. At the end of the last play, each of the judges writes his selections for first, second, and third prizes upon a tablet. The tablets are placed in an urn, and an archon draws out 5 tablets at random. These 5 judgments, summed up, constitute the final award, and the other 5 are destroyed unread. No one, therefore, can know in advance who the judges are to be, or which of them will really judge. Despite these precautions, there is some corruption or intimidation of judges. Plato complains that the judges, through fear of the crowd, almost always decide according to the applause, and argues that this theatrocracy is debasing both the dramatists and the audience. When the contest is over, the victorious poet and his choragus are crowned with ivy, and sometimes the victors set up a monument, like the choragic monument of Socrates, to commemorate their triumph. Even kings compete for this crown. The size of the theater and the traditions of the festival determine in large measure the nature of the Greek drama. Since nuances cannot be conveyed by facial expression or vocal inflection, subtle character portraits are rare in the Dionysian theater. The Greek drama is a study of fate, or of man in conflict with the gods. The Elizabethan drama is a study of action, or of man in conflict with man. The modern drama is a study of character, or of man in conflict with himself. The Athenian audience knows in advance the destiny of each person represented and the issue of each action, for religious custom is still strong enough in the 5th century to limit the theme of the Dionysian drama to some story from the accepted myths and legends of the early Greeks. There is no suspense and no surprise, but instead the pleasures of anticipation and recognition. Dramatist after dramatist tells the same tale to the same audience. What differs is the poetry, the music, the interpretation, and the philosophy. Even the philosophy, before Euripides, is determined in large measure by tradition. Throughout Aeschylus and Sophocles, the prevailing theme is the nemesis of punishment by jealous gods or impersonal fate for insolent presumption and irreverent pride, hubris, and the recurring moral is the wisdom of conscience, honor, and a modest moderation, eidos. It is this combination of philosophy with poetry, action, music, song, and dance that makes the Greek drama not only a new form in the history of literature, but one that almost at the outset achieves a grandeur never equaled again. 3. Aeschylus. Not quite at the outset, for as many talents in heredity and history prepare the way for a genius, so some lesser playwrights, who may here be forgotten with honor, intervened between Thespis and Aeschylus. Perhaps it was the successful resistance to Persia that gave Athens the pride and stimulus necessary to an age of great drama, while the wealth that came with trade and empire after the war provided for the costly Dionysian contests in dithyrambic singing and the choral play. Aeschylus felt both the stimulus and the pride in person. Like so many Greek writers of the 5th century, he lived as well as wrote, and knew how to do as well as to speak. In 499, at the age of 26, he produced his first play. In 490, he and his 2 brothers fought at Marathon, and so bravely that Athens ordered a painting to commemorate their deeds. In 484, he won his first prize at the Dionysian festival. In 480, he fought at Artemisium and Salamis, and in 479 at Plataea. In 476 and 470, he visited Syracuse, and was honored at the court of Hiron I. In 468, after dominating Athenian literature for a generation, he lost the first prize for drama to the youthful Sophocles. In 467, he recaptured supremacy with his 7 against Thebes. In 458, he won his last and greatest victory with the Oresteia trilogy. In 456, he was again in Sicily, and there in that year he died. It took a man of such energy to mold the Greek drama into its classic form. It was Aeschylus who added a second actor to the one drawn out from the chorus by Thespis, and thereby completed the transformation of the Dionysian chant from an oratorio into a play. Though in Aeschylus the actors were only 2, the roles they played in a drama were limited only in the sense that no more than 2 characters could be on the stage at once. The leader of the chorus was sometimes individualized into a 3rd actor. Minor characters, attendants, soldiers, etc., were not counted as actors. He wrote 70, some say 90 dramas, of which 7 remain. Of these, the earliest 3 are minor works. The most famous is the Prometheus Bound. The greatest make up the Oresteia trilogy. The Prometheus Bound, too, may have been part of a trilogy, though no ancient authority vouches for this. We hear of a satyr play by Aeschylus called Prometheus the Firebringer, but it was produced apart from the Prometheus Bound in a quite different combination. Fragments survive of a Prometheus Unbound by Aeschylus. These are well-nigh meaningless, but anxious scholars assure us that if we had the full text, we should find Aeschylus answering satisfactorily all the heresies which the extant play puts into the hero's lines. Even so, it is noteworthy that an Athenian audience at a religious festival should have put up with the Titan's blasphemies. As the play opens, we find Prometheus being chained to a rock in the Caucasus by Hephaestus at the command of a Zeus irate because Prometheus has taught men the art of fire. Hephaestus speaks, "High-thoughted son of Themis, who is sage? Thee thy loathe must rivet fast in chains against this rocky height unclomb by man, where never human voice nor face shall find out thee who lovest them, and thy beauty's flowers, scorched in the sun's clear heat, shall fade away. Night shall come up with garniture of stars to comfort thee with shadow, and the sun disperse with retricked beams the morning frosts. But through all dangers sense of present woe shall vex thee sore, because with none of them there comes a hand to free. Such fruit is plucked from love of man, for Zeus is stern, and new-made kings are cruel." Hanging helpless on the crag, Prometheus hurls defiance to Olympus, and recounts proudly the steps by which he brought civilization to primitive men, who till then lived like silly ants beneath the ground in hollow caves unsunned. There came to them no steadfast sign of winter, nor spring, flower perfumed, nor of summer full of fruit. But blindly and lawlessly they did all things, until I taught them how the stars do rise and set in mystery, and devised for them number, the inducer of philosophies, the synthesis of letters, and besides the artificer of all things, memory, that sweet muse-mother. I was first to yoke the servile beasts, and none but I originated ships, and I who did devise for mortals all these arts have no device left now to save myself. The whole earth mourns with him. There is a cry in the waves of the sea as they fall together, and a groaning in the deep. A wail comes up from the cavern realms of death. All the nations send their condolences to this political prisoner, and bid him remember that suffering visits all. Grief walks the earth and sits down at the feet of each by turns, but they do nothing to free him. Oceanus advises him to yield, seeing that who reigns by cruelty instead of right. And the chorus of Oceanids, daughters of the sea, wonder whether humanity deserves to be suffered for with such a crucifixion. Nay, thine was a helpless sacrifice, O beloved. Didst thou not see the race of men, how little in effort and energy, dreamers bound in chains? Nevertheless, they so admire him that when Zeus threatens to hurl him down into Tartarus, they stay by him, and face with him the thunderbolt that blasts them and Prometheus into the abyss. But Prometheus, being a god, is denied the easement of death. In the lost conclusion of the trilogy, he is raised up from Tartarus to be again chained to a mountain rock, and a vulture is commissioned by Zeus to gnaw out the Titan's heart. The heart grows by night as fast as the vulture consumes it by day. In this way Prometheus suffers through 13 generations of men. Then the kindly giant Heracles kills the vulture and persuades Zeus to free Prometheus. The Titan repents, makes his peace with omnipotence, and places upon his finger the iron ring of necessity. In this simple and powerful trilogy, Aeschylus set the theme of Greek drama, the struggle of human will against inescapable destiny, and the theme of the life of Greece in the 5th century, the conflict between rebellious thought and traditional belief. His conclusion is conservative, but he knows the case for the rebel and gives it all his sympathy. Not even in Euripides shall we find so critical a view of Olympus. This is another paradise lost in which the fallen angel, despite the poet's piety, is the hero of the tale. Probably Milton often recalled Aeschylus's Titan when he composed such eloquent speeches for Satan. Goethe was fond of this play and used Prometheus as a mouthpiece in irreverent youth. Byron made him the model of nearly all his selves, and Shelley, always at odds with fate, brought the story back to life in Prometheus Unbound, where the rebel never yields. The legend hides a dozen allegories. Suffering is the fruit of the tree of knowledge. To know the future is to gnaw one's heart away. The liberator is always crucified. And in the end one must accept limits, man muss entsagen, must accomplish his purpose within the nature of things. This is a noble theme and helps the majestic language of Aeschylus to make the Prometheus a tragedy in the grand style. Never has the war between knowledge and superstition, enlightenment and obscurantism, genius and dogma been more powerfully pictured or lifted to a higher reach of symbol and utterance. The other productions of the Greek tragedians, said Schlegel, are so many tragedies, but this is tragedy herself. Nevertheless, the Oresteia is greater still, by common consent the finest achievement in Greek drama, perhaps in all drama. It was produced in 458, probably 2 years after Prometheus Bound, and 2 years before the author's death. The theme is the fateful breeding of violence by violence, and the inescapable punishment through generation after generation of insolent pride and excess. We call it a legend, but the Greeks, perhaps rightly, called it history. The story, as told by each of the greater dramatists of Greece, might be called the children of Tantalus, for it was he, the Phrygian king so recklessly proud in his wealth, who began the long chain of crime and called down the vengeance of the Furies by stealing the nectar and ambrosia of the gods and giving the divine food to Pelops, his son. In every age some men acquire more wealth than befits a man and use it to spoil their children. We have seen how Pelops, by foul means, won the throne of Aeschylus, slew his accomplice, and married the daughter of the king whom he had deceived and killed. By Hippodamia he had 3 children, Thyestes, Erope, and Atreus. Thyestes seduced Erope. Atreus, to avenge his sister, served up his brother's children to him at a banquet, whereupon Aeschylus, son of Thyestes by Thyestes' daughter, vowed vengeance upon Atreus and his line. Atreus had 2 sons, Agamemnon and Menelaus. Agamemnon married Clytemnestra, and had by her 2 daughters, Iphigenia and Electra, and 1 son, Orestes. At Aulis, where his ships were becalmed on the way to Troy, Agamemnon, to the horror of Clytemnestra, sacrificed Iphigenia to induce the winds to blow. While Agamemnon besieged Troy, Aeschylus courted his brooding wife, won her, and plotted with her to kill the king. It is at this point that Aeschylus takes up the tale. The news has come to Argos that the war is over, and proud Agamemnon, robed in steel and armies trembled at his wrath, has landed on Peloponnesian shores and is approaching Mycenae. A chorus of elders appears before the royal palace, and in ominous chant recalls Agamemnon's abandonment of Iphigenia. In that which must be he armed him slowly, and a strange wind within his bosom tossed, a wind of dark thought, unclean, unholy, and he rose up, daring to the uttermost. For men are boldened by a blindness, straying toward base desire, which brings grief hereafter, yea, and itself is grief. So this man hardened to his own child's slaying, as help to avenge him for a woman's laughter and bring his ship's relief. With violence and a curb's voiceless wrath her stole of saffron to the ground she threw, and her eye with an arrow of pity found its path to each man's heart that slew. A face in a picture, striving amazedly, the little maid who danced at her father's board, the innocent voice, man's love, came never nigh, who joined to his her little paean cry when the 3rd cup was poured. Agamemnon's herald enters to announce the coming of the king. Aeschylus realizes with fine imagination the joy of the simple soldier as he sets foot, after long absence, upon his native soil. Now, says the herald, I am ready, if God will, to die. He describes to the chorus the terror and filth of the war, the rain that sent a moisture into the bones, the vermin that multiplied in the hair, the breathless heat of Ilion's summer, and the winter so cold that all the birds fell dead. Clytemnestra comes from the palace, somber, nervous, and yet proud, and orders rich hangings to be strewn for Agamemnon's path. The king enters in the royal chariot, escorted by his troops, and erect in the pride of victory. Behind him is another chariot, bearing the darkly beautiful Cassandra, Trojan princess and prophetess, the resentful slave of Agamemnon's lust, who bitterly predicts his punishment and gloomily foresees her own death. With clever speech, Clytemnestra recounts to the king her years of longing for this return. For you indeed the rushing fountains of my tears have run dry, and there is no drop left. But in my eyes, worn with late watching, you may see how I sorrowed for the signals of your victory that ever tarried. And in my disturbed sleep I started at the faint buzzing of the gnat's wing, for I dreamt of you long tales of woe, crowded into a short moment of repose. He suspects her sincerity, and reproves her dourly for the lavish outlay of broidered hangings under his horse's feet. But he follows her into the palace, and Cassandra resignedly accompanies him. Through an intense pause in the action, the chorus intones softly a song of evil premonition. Then from within comes the cry towards which every line of the drama has moved, the death cry of Agamemnon, slain by Aegisthus and Clytemnestra. The portals open. Clytemnestra is shown with axe in hand and blood on her brow, standing triumphant over the corpses of Cassandra and the king, and the chorus chants the end. Would God that suddenly, with no great agony, no long sick watch to keep, my hour would come to me, my hour, and presently bring the eternal, the unwaking sleep, now that my shepherd, he whose love watched over me, lies in the deep. The second play in the trilogy, the Coephory, or Libation Bearers, takes its title from the chorus of women who bring offerings to the grave of the king. Clytemnestra has sent her young son Orestes to be reared in distant Phocis, hoping that he may forget his father's death. But old men there teach him the ancient law of vengeance. The shed drop doth crave new blood. The state, in those dark days, left the punishment of murder to the dead man's kin, and men believed that the soul of the slain would know no peace till he had been avenged. Orestes, haunted and horrified with the thought of his mission to kill his mother and Aegisthus, comes secretly to Argos with his comrade Pylades, seeks out his father's tomb, and lays upon it a lock of his hair. Hearing the approach of the libation bearers, the young men withdraw, and listen in fascination as Electra, Orestes' brooding sister, comes with the women, stands over the grave, and calls upon Agamemnon's spirit to arouse Orestes to avenge him. Orestes reveals himself, and from her bitter heart she pours into his simple mind the thought that he must kill their mother. The youths, disguised as merchants, proceed to the royal palace. Clytemnestra softens them with hospitality. But when Orestes tests her by saying that the boy she sent to Phocis is dead, he is shocked to see a secret joy hiding in her grief. She calls Aegisthus to share with him the news that the avenger whom they feared is no more. Orestes slays him, drives his mother into the palace, and comes out a moment later already half insane with the consciousness that he is a matricide. While I am still not mad, I here declare to all who love me, and confess that I have slain my mother. In the third play, Orestes is pursued, in the poet's externalization of the boy's wild fancy, by the Erinyes, or Furies, whose task it is to punish crime, and from their euphemistic deprecatory title, the Eumenides, or well-wishers, the play derives its name. Orestes is an outcast, shunned by all men. Wherever he goes, the Furies hang over him as black ghosts, crying out for his blood. He flings himself upon the altar of Apollo at Delphi, and Apollo comforts him. But the shade of Clytemnestra rises from the earth to urge the Furies not to desist from torturing her son. Orestes goes to Athens, kneels before Athena's shrine, and cries out to her for deliverance. Athena hears him and calls him perfect by suffering. When the Erinyes protest, she summons them to try Orestes' case before the council of the Areopagus. The concluding scene shows this strange trial, symbolical of the replacement of blood revenge with law. Athena, goddess of the city, presides. The Furies state the case for vengeance against Orestes, and Apollo defends him. The court divides evenly. Athena casts the deciding ballot in favor of Orestes and declares him free. She solemnly establishes the Council of the Areopagus as henceforth the Supreme Court of Attica, whose swift condemnation of the murderer shall free the land from feuds, and whose wisdom will guide the state through the dangers that beset every people. The goddess, by her fair speech, appeases the disappointed Furies, and so wins them that their leader says, "This day a new order is born." After the Iliad and the Odyssey, the Oresteia is the highest achievement in Greek literature. This book is continued at this point on the other side of this cassette. Please reverse or turn the cassette over now.